Hello and welcome to this installment of the U of T School of Continuing Studies Knowledge Hub. My name is Sean Gilligan. I'm a member of the Strategic Communications and Marketing team here at SCS, and I'll be your host for today. I'd like to start by acknowledging this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Today's webinar topic is Mindfulness in an Exponential Age. I'm pleased to introduce to you our presenter today, Jay Vidyarthi. Jay is an attention activist. His goal is to empower individuals to reclaim choice over what influences their thoughts and behaviors. He believes mindfulness will equip people to reclaim this free choice in the attention economy in which we find ourselves. As a designer, Jay has helped launch mindful technologies like Muse, the brain sensing headband, Sonic Cradle, the Healthy Minds program, Bright Mind, and many others. Jay serves on the advisory council for the Mindful Society Global Institute. He's taught design at major educational institutions, and he's been recognized and featured internationally by Harvard, MIT, Forbes, Fast Company, TED, and many others. Jay, thanks so much for joining us today, and thanks for sharing your time.
Pleasure to be here. Welcome, everybody. So glad to see you all here. We have some interesting stuff to go through together today, and I'm really excited to see all your names in the attendee list. And I've planned a couple of interesting things, but I also don't want this to feel too canned. I know what that feels like. So I want to make sure that we have space. So I'm going to be asking you at times to share things in the chat. And I'm going to try to be on time so we have enough time for questions. I know a lot of these presentations don't always work out that way. So let's get started. I'm going to share some slides for us to talk through, and we should be all set to go. Okay. So the first thing I want you to do is pull up the chat window, which you can see in your little drawer on the right. And it really helps me to know why you're here, right? What I have in front of me is a list of all your wonderful names, and I love to see the diversity in names there. It makes me really happy. I see a number, 174. I don't see your faces. I don't know that much about you. And so I'd really encourage you to jump into the chat right now and share your name, your location, so where you're joining us from. You could say the country or the city. And also, most importantly, what you're hoping to get out of this session. So if this was a very successful hour of your time, what would you walk away with? That's really, really important for me to know so that I can tailor the message and talk about things that you really care about. So take a moment now to do that. I'll wait. Seeing the messages come in. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. Interest in the mindfulness topic. Practical strategies, good to know. Advice and ideas, how to reclaim my focus and attention. Don't we all? Absolutely. Always wanting more knowledge, want to feel more relaxed. Very fair. Let's see what we can do for that. Tools to add to my toolbox. Understand what mindfulness means today. To learn how to organically include. Letting go. Thanks, Mary. We can, every moment is an opportunity to let go. So take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, let go. Useful tools to be present. This is wonderful. Thank you so much to everyone who's sharing. This gives me a really great idea. The basics of mindfulness, how tech affects kids. Wonderful, wonderful. Beautiful. Okay, keep it coming. Thank you so much, everyone. That gives me a really good sense of how to be most useful for you today, and that's really, really helpful. I don't want to just talk some memorized ideas and not actually reach where you're at. So I got the sense here that we want to really get into mindfulness and how it reflects in the current world, which is good. I think what we've planned is good. Okay, let's dive in. Thank you, everyone. So we're going to be talking first about what mindfulness is, and then we're going to talk about how it's relevant in, as Meg just put it in the chat, a crazy world, or how I've been putting it, the exponential age that we live in. And then what I want to pitch to you at the end of this is something that I've been really passionate about in the past half decade or so, which is this concept of attention activism. So it sounds like a big, bold buzzword, but hopefully by the end of the presentation, you'll have a sense of what that means and why it's so critically important in the world we're living in today. So first, what is mindfulness? So not an easy question to answer. You may have heard this word being thrown around a lot in society today. And in fact, there's not really a clear single definition for it. There's a lot of different frameworks, a lot of different ways to think about it, from scientific frameworks coming from the academic literature to historical frameworks and translations of ancient words to modern contemporary practical understandings. But the one thing that I will say is that mindfulness is something that you experience. And so before we get into talking about any kind of conceptual definition, I want to start us off by actually experiencing a little bit of mindfulness. So what I want to do now is I want to guide us into a very simple experience. So get comfortable. No need to engage with the screen for this moment. And I'm just going to take us through a short tour of the different senses we can be mindful in. So if you prefer to close your eyes, you're more than welcome to do so. If you like to keep them open. If you're feeling like this is kind of awkward and you just want to listen, that's totally your right. There's no need to fully engage. If you do want to engage, what I'll ask you to do is get comfortable, upright, sort of relaxed, nothing, too awkward, just something that feels natural for your body. And what we're going to do is we're going to play around with your faculty of attention. So first, pay attention to whatever point of contact you might have with the ground or a chair or a cushion, anywhere where your body is connecting with the ground, and see if you can really pay attention to what it feels like to be connected with the ground right now. And then let's slowly bring our attention up the body so you can notice any sensations that might be present in your legs. How interesting, right? We have these legs that we don't always pay attention to, but when we turn our attention there's a whole lot going on. There's maybe texture, maybe a little tension, maybe discomfort, maybe a little tingle, an itch, maybe some pain. Let's keep moving up the body to the hips. And if we encounter any unnecessary tension, let's just let go of that. So if you happen to notice any tension, just bring your attention there and use that power of awareness to just let go and dissolve that tension. Let's keep going up to your stomach and your lower back. Stomach is an area where we're often unnecessarily holding tension. So just let it all hang out. Just let it go. Just be natural for a few more moments. Up to the chest. Letting go of the shoulders. Letting the arms rest gently in the lap. Shoulders, neck is another area where we tend to hold a lot of tension. Releasing the jaw, the cheeks, the muscles around your eyes. Just sort of progressively and systematically relaxing. And let's take a moment now to zoom out and just pay attention to the whole body at once. So kind of like widening the aperture of your attentional lens and seeing if you can notice the entire body at once. And now letting go of the body and paying attention to what it feels like to hear sound. Noticing the sound of my voice, noticing any sounds that might be around you. Maybe there's acute sounds like a door slamming or a car honking. Maybe there's just kind of persistent din, the drone of a heater or an air conditioner. Just paying attention fully to that experience of hearing. If you find this a little awkward or you're finding thoughts are getting in the way, just let that all be. There's no way to do this wrong, really. There's no need to resist anything you might be experiencing. In some ways, your thoughts are even something you can hear. Just like you can hear the sound out there, you can hear a little voice in your head saying things. It's kind of a miraculous experience of being a human being, right? So we're just letting it all be as it is. And then finally, I want you to bring your attention to the experience of seeing. So if your eyes were closed, you can keep them closed and look at the darkness and the swirls of light behind your eyelids. Or if you want to open your eyes, you're more than welcome to do that as well. Noticing color, texture, and shape. Seeing if we can let go of all the labels that we have for the things we experience visually and just noticing them as a pattern of light. You can notice shadows, colors, textures, just letting it all be there. There's no need to gravitate towards visual experiences we like. Like, for example, there's like a beautiful light that I have behind my laptop, but I can also just look at the blank wall. There's almost just as much interesting about the blank wall as there is about the beautiful light. So just letting it all wash over your visual sense. Okay, letting go of that. Let's take a few moments to transition out of that practice. You can take a stretch, take a deep breath, whatever you need. No rush whatsoever. I'm going to give myself a little stretch, actually, because I noticed some tension in my shoulders. That definitely comes from giving a presentation like this. So take a moment. So whenever you're ready, I want you to jump back into the chat and just share a few words about what that exercise was like for you. What did you experience in that exercise? I'd love to hear from you in the chat. So please take a moment to do that now. Smooth and calm. Thanks, Ankita. Sleepy, so calming. Heart rate slowed down, relaxing, peaceful, calm, at home within myself. Thank you. That's beautiful. Like yoga, being in the moment, awareness, grounding. Feel free to share even if it was not a calm experience. So I like the negative things too. It felt agitating, felt awkward. Who is this guy on a U of T webinar spouting this weird stuff? That's fine. Challenging, interesting but difficult. Waves. Didn't think about work for a moment. Oh, Sarah, that must have been lovely. Toddler kept interrupting. I got my toddler in the other room, so I'm with you there, Abby. Peaceful, calm, therapeutic. Wanted it to last longer, don't we all? Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate this dialogue. It makes it feel like I'm not just talking at a computer, but you're really out there. We have some sort of connection here. So, mindfulness. What is it? Right? There's so many definitions, but really what you just experienced is mindfulness. And the definitions here, I mean, there's so many different ways you can describe it, but they never really fully capture what you experience in those 5 minutes, right? But we can still find a lot of value in trying to clarify and define it. And so one of the most useful definitions I've found is the one you're looking at right now. So first of all, mindfulness is an innate ability. It's something that we all have the ability to do when we're born. It's a part of who we are. And when you're practicing mindfulness, it's not like you're getting something new or building something new. You're just training a skill you already have, right? Just like we all have the ability for language, but when we're young, we start to learn and we start to get lessons and we start to mimic our parents and we start to actually be able to apply that innate potential to learn one of the world's 7,000 languages, right? So we all have this innate ability to be mindful. And what we mean by that is the ability to pay attention to what we deem relevant. So to choose what we want to pay attention to and actually pay attention to it. To fully experience what we're paying attention to. So not just to pay attention to something, but to really experience the texture and the color or the subtle vibrations of the sound or the subtle shape and texture of those body sensations, right? But then also to let those experiences come and go without resisting or getting stuck on them. So if we have a body sensation that's painful, to not let that kind of hijack our mind that we become acutely obsessed with getting away from this pain. And if we have an experience that we really enjoy, to not spend the rest of our life chasing that same experience again, but to try to sort of find something relevant, right? To find a flow with our experience where we're not latching on and getting stuck to everything that comes forward. So that's sort of how we're thinking about mindfulness, and it's a skill we can develop. Interestingly, in the past 50 years, there has been a lot of research on mindfulness, scientific research, neuroscience, clinical research on trying to understand what it is. And we could do a whole presentation on the science. I don't want to spend that whole thing, especially since none of you shared that you were here to learn too much about the science. But what I will say is some of the most fascinating things that have come out of it. One is this structure of the brain that you're seeing here called the default mode network. And this is a structure, a series of structures in the brain that are connecting to each other, that are basically active when you are idling. So if you're waiting for the bus and your mind wanders or you're daydreaming, this is the sort of default mode network. So it's well named. It's basically when you're in your default mode. Now, here's what's interesting about it. When you did that 5-minute mindfulness practice a few moments ago, and when we have people in the brain scanners doing meditation, we find a general downregulation of the default mode network. So you stop daydreaming and mind wandering, which matches that experience that you have in the moment. But at the same time, if you measure someone who's been meditating for, an 8-week course or on a 1-month retreat, or someone who's been meditating for 10 years, 20 years, and it become a major part of their life, not only do we see much, much, much less activation in the default mode network when they're meditating, but also when they're not meditating as kind of part of their daily life. So for example, for myself, I've been meditating for over 10 years. I'm not meditating right now. I'm giving a presentation. But what this science basically shows us is that because of that meditation, my activation in these mind-wandering and daydreaming states is lower even now when I'm doing something active in life. What's even more interesting about the science is that's a kind of mechanistic understanding of how it's happening in the brain. But mindfulness practice is associated with decreased symptomology of things like anxiety and depression and different relationships to pain, as well as increased wellness, increased productivity, increased well-being, increased happiness, increased resilience, increased emotional regulation. So there's something about down-regulating and attenuating that kind of monkey mind that is sort of persistent in our daily lives, that we end up being able to sort of control and be more of a less on autopilot and more in the captain's chair of our minds, which I think is a really, really useful skill. Now, what's really kind of interesting is I don't want to use this science to kind of reduce the thousands of years of history of these practices. So I wrote first wave with a little s there because really there's been many, many waves throughout history that various forms of contemplative practice have emerged in almost all human traditions and cultures. From religions to human cultures, there have been people who have investigated the present moment and the state of mind. And we're kind of standing on the shoulders of those giants. And so the science doesn't necessarily tell the full story. We're very early on the science here. But there has been a second wave where science is just the latest tradition to get interested in these contemplative practices. So the second wave has been in the past few years, past few decades, I guess, where the scientific institution has started to look at mindfulness as a clinical intervention and integrating it into sectors of society. And what I'm here to talk about is what I believe is the third wave. Again, not diminishing, but actually appreciating and building on the first waves and the second wave, but also bringing a third wave, which I call attention activism, which is this idea that mindfulness now in our modern world is becoming a subversive act to reclaim our freedom in response to the world we live in, a world where exponential media technologies, which overwhelm our minds, are everywhere. And we're overloaded with information and everyone is trying to influence. So that seems like a lot, but that's what we're going to talk about in the entire presentation, and I'm going to get to it. And I just saw that exchange in the chat about disabling the pop-ups. They are very distracting, and it's actually quite relevant to our presentation. So I'm going to encourage everyone, if you want, to go into the settings. There's a notification section where you can actually remove some of those pop-ups, and I'm going to do that now for myself because it keeps distracting me as well. It's a perfect example of the world we live in, right? That It's almost like nowhere you can go. Even you log into a chat about mindfulness with me, and there's nowhere you can go where you're not getting dinged and pitched by these messages constantly. Your phone's buzzing and your emails are coming in. And even the chat on this BB Collaborate system for some reason is just pinging you constantly, and you can't focus on what you're trying to pay attention to. And that's the world we live in now, right? So let's put it another way. We live in an exponential age. So for those of us who aren't as mathematically friendly, an exponential curve is where things multiply instead of add. So a linear curve, in 8 steps, we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In an exponential curve, it's more like 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. So in 8 steps, we're all the way up to 128. And the reason why I think about our current society as an exponential age is because we've got things growing exponentially everywhere. Our population is growing exponentially, mostly relevant today. The cases of COVID-19 grow exponentially. Hopefully, we are reducing that now. Processing power of our computers is growing exponentially. This is something called Moore's Law. Internet traffic is growing exponentially in connected devices. Carbon emissions are growing exponentially. And interestingly, interest in mindfulness is also growing exponentially. If you look at a graph of the scientific publications about mindfulness over the past 50 years, you see that same exponential curve where now we're having thousands of academic publications about mindfulness every year. And only 30 or 40 years ago, it was like in the tens. So we're seeing this mindfulness explosion in society. And you see it all around you, right? We have people meditating at the World Economic Forum. We have the UK Parliament have released the Mindful Nation UK report, which is exploring mindfulness as an officially recognized clinical intervention for schools and for healthcare and for social work and other areas. We've got schools around the world that are bringing mindfulness into their curriculum. And this is actually kind of our local in the Toronto area police force, the Peel Region Police Force, meditating as part of their police training. Time magazine called it the mindful revolution with this really peaceful looking woman, which, I may have something to say about that. But I think there is definitely something happening in our society where, interestingly, this practice that's thousands of years old, we're seeing exponential interest in it all of a sudden. And so what I really want to encourage you to think about is why. Why is that happening? My contention is that I want you to wonder, is our collective interest in mindfulness a response to what's happening in the world around us, right? These notifications, this world we live in, right? You can think about technology really easily like this. This is the way it was depicted in WALL-E, which is a great Pixar film, where you've got this sort of overweight man with his fully nutrient smoothie, a screen right up in his face, and a wheelchair that hovers him around. And it's like, this is kind of the ideal society, the technological utopia, sarcastically put by the animators at Pixar, right? And it's not hard to see where that image is coming from, right? It's very clear in our daily lives to see that these connected devices, these social media, these smartphones and technologies are influencing our relationships. They're getting in the way of deep connection, but they're also enabling connection, right? In different ways. They are changing the way we see ourselves. They're influencing our identity. Younger and younger children are being exposed to these devices at a younger and younger age. And of course, they're reaching us at the most intimate places, even when we're about to fall asleep. And they're in our pockets all the time and constantly reaching out for us. That's not the full story, though, because that's an easy blame. But when we talk about technology, technology is a much bigger concept than a smartphone that pings you with a notification you didn't need to hear or tries to sell you something, right? The way that we're connecting right now is through technology, right? When you listen to music, you're using technology. When you cook food in your kitchen, you're using technology. So it doesn't do us any service to just say technology is a problem or technology is evil or this problem is, been created by technology. We have to be a little bit more clear and a little bit more specific about what we mean, because technology ultimately is just doing skillfully something based on a theory or on science. So it's a kind of systematic way of applying a craft to create something. And we do this in many, many different areas of our society. And you just have to look at this pandemic to realize, the idea that technology is inherently a problem doesn't make sense, because these technologies have been a lifeline while many of us have been quarantined locked in our homes in the pandemic, technology has enabled us to connect with people. I know, for example, my 2-year-old would not have nearly as much connection with his grandparents in the first 2 years of his life if it wasn't for some of these technologies helping us through the pandemic. Not to mention how these technologies are allowing us to continue work and even log in to a webinar like this and connect the way we are right now. So it doesn't do us any service to just throw all technology out the window. But that doesn't mean we have to ignore the fact that technology does prey on our vulnerabilities. So this is from Spike Jonze's movie Her. Some of you may have seen it, and it paints a really powerful picture about how technology really is a kind of extension of our mental selves. So if you think about that from like a cyborg anthropological perspective, right? Our cars are kind of like an extension of our legs. Our legs help us get from point A to point B. Our cars help us do that better, right? Our kitchens are an extension of our stomachs, right? Our stomachs are designed to digest the food we eat. When we use the kitchen, we can really support that digestive process and get a lot more nutrients and use a lot more food and waste less, and et cetera, right? Our connected technologies, the way we're connecting right now, is an extension of our minds, right? In reality, I am talking to a box right now. There's a little circle on a little box. That's what I'm really doing, right? If like the way my cat looks at what I'm doing right now is like, why are you talking at the wall? Right? But in reality, we have this extension of our minds that we've built where we can connect to each other in all these really interesting ways. But the interesting part about it is that by opening kind of Pandora's box and creating this, we've also opened the back door to our minds where we can actually have our minds be very strongly influenced by this connected network that we've created. And unfortunately, a lot of our human vulnerabilities are being exposed. So I want to pause here for another comment in the chat before we talk into some of those vulnerabilities. And I'm going to pull up the chat again here. I want to get a sense of what comes to mind when I ask you this question. What ways has technology influenced your relationships, your identity, your health, or your worldview? So whatever comes to mind naturally. What ways do you see technology having affected your life in these ways? Please share in the chat now. Thank you. So we're already seeing this dichotomy between the expansion and personal growth and the distraction and the overwhelmingness of technology. Wonderful. Great sharing. Very mixed, exactly. Christine summed it up. Yeah, like Ron is pointing out that we can meet people around the world, that there's, Sarah's got the positive things, better communication with family and friends. Then we also see Zara sharing diminished personal relationships, becoming overwhelming, making me fragile, contributed to polarization, huge distraction, etc. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, everybody. Yes, contribution to polarization, huge. That's right, Julia. Overwhelming. Takes up so much time. Connections become shallow. Absolutely right, everyone. And there's this dichotomy. It's a double-edged sword, right? Now, there's actually some growing research on the effects that all this technology is having on us. And unfortunately, some of it is quite worrisome. In the past 10 years, we're seeing a spike in issues related to mental health, things like anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicide, especially in the younger generation, especially young women, actually. And you're also seeing interesting behavioral changes where young kids that are growing up with this technology, you're looking at a data set that's been collected for decades, and we're seeing all of a sudden a huge change in the past 10 years in things like children's likelihood to get a driver's license, children's likelihood to hang out with friends, children's likelihood to date and explore romantic relationships, increased likelihood for children to feel lonely, less quality of sleep in young people. And this is something that you see also beyond young people across society. So we can't necessarily causally tie this to technology yet. We don't have the science to claim that. But when you take a lot of the directional evidence along with our lived experience, what we all just share in the chat, that we do feel like this is affecting our relationships, making them a bit more shallow. We do see our kids who are kind of like ignoring the natural world as they sit their devices. We're not trying to demonize technology here. We're just trying to be very aware that there are some unintended consequences here. And I feel very strongly that technology is contributing to them. The World Health Organization estimates that by 2030, major depressive disorder, so depression, is going to be the biggest burden on our society. Like, that's the trend that we're moving towards. So it is kind of scary and something that we all kind of experience. Like, I know personally, like, when I'm in a conversation with someone and they're looking at their phone and they're not really paying attention to me, it's very emotionally taxing. And there's actually some research that shows just if you and I sat down to have a cup of tea together, just the fact that you would have your cell phone on the table in front of you, just the presence of it, even if it's off, is going to reduce the quality of our connection and the likelihood that we're going to share vulnerability with each other. Because, my sense of that is, like, by putting my phone out on the table, I'm basically telling you, like, telegraphing to you, that you better be interesting, because I've got the whole universe here that you have to compete with. And it puts a lot of emotional strain on our relationships. And those of you who are in romantic relationships and marriages might know exactly what I mean about how technology can sort of get in the way. And some people touched on this in the chat, but advertising is actually a really dangerous part of this, because not only are we looking at our devices all the time in very intimate parts of our day, but a lot of the information in the ecosystem that exists online is powered by advertising. And advertising is not a neutral force. Advertising has been shown, for example, to increase body image issues and eating disorders in young women. It's starting to be shown to have an impact on polarization, as someone mentioned in the chat, where every media company is competing to try to make the most outrageous sort of polarized story to get the attention of the reader. You're not going to read a story that says, politicians debated an issue and here's the details of the nuanced debate. You're going to read, like, so-and-so slams so-and-so, with some pithy insult or quote, because that's what you're going to click on. And so it's created a very dangerous situation in our society. And when you look closely at the business model of social media like Facebook and others, and you might know that Facebook has been under a lot of scrutiny over the past few years because of this, they use targeted advertising that advertisers usually say, we collect a lot of data about you to provide more relevant ads. But relevance is not a great argument, given the fact that you're going to sell fast food ads to someone who's trying to lose weight, and you're going to target shopping ads to someone who's trying to buy less because of their past behavior, right? So ads systematically are designed to target our desires, insecurities, and fears. And if you go look into the frameworks that advertisers use, a lot of them are systematically and surgically trying to influence your behavior. Now, that's not necessarily evil. You can influence more donations for a charity, and that's a part of marketing as well. So again, it's not a black or white that marketing is evil. But with these devices reaching us in every moment of our day, you're glancing at your phone as the last thing you see before you go to bed, and the first thing you see in the morning. Having these advertisements come directly through that channel is dangerous. And don't get me started about the political parties that are using these tools to influence your vote and what that means about polarization and the fundamental foundations of what makes a democratic and free society. So I know I'm putting a lot on you here, but I think Herb Simon in the 60s, a Nobel laureate, maybe put it the best. He was probably the first person to really predict and explain what we now call the attention economy. So here's what Herb said. What information consumes is rather obvious. It consumes the attention of its recipients. Hence, a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention and a need to allocate that attention efficiently among the overabundance of information sources that might consume it. He said that in the 60s. So, like, props to Herb Simon for being very prescient about the world we were building, because this is the world we live in now. We have an abundance of information, and I would add a lot of it trying to influence us in ways that may not be beneficial for us, but are beneficial for those behind those ads. And we have a poverty of attention. It's very difficult to pay attention to a conversation with a loved one, to pay attention to your work, to not think about work when you're trying to sleep. We have real struggles, and we're starting to see the clinical fallout in the growing mental health conditions that we're seeing growing in the world. That's an oversimplification, but it definitely contributes. And that brings us to attention activism, which you may have sensed that I'm very passionate about this topic and can get kind of ranty. Apologies for that. But attention activism is something that I think We are already doing it in society, and we need more people, and I hope all of you will join us in this cause. The reality is, as we discussed, the way that mindfulness seems to be influencing the brain and the default mode network is pivotal around certain subsystems of attention in the brain. So as you experienced in our 5-minute practice at the beginning of our hour together, this practice is all about playing and practicing with your attention. We're paying attention to the body, we're paying attention to sounds, we're paying attention to what we see, and we're training this ability to pay attention to what we deem relevant with clarity and balance. And so I don't see this as a coincidence. Spoiler alert, this is where I'm going, right? We've got this society that is commanding and pulling our attention in all these directions, that our attention is being so fragmented in ways that we've got all kinds of forces trying to influence us to be one way, to be another way. And we have growing interest and understanding that mindfulness is one of a few tools that can help us actually reclaim this ability to pay attention. What an incredible power that we can claim for ourselves, right? So my contention to you is that mindfulness enables us to reclaim choice in an economy of influence which profits from harvesting our minds. I'll say that again. Mindfulness enables us as individuals to reclaim choice in a larger economy around us that's trying to influence us and trying to harvest our minds, right? Whether you're a YouTube creator or a political party or a brand or a nonprofit, anyone, in order to be successful and powerful and have influence in the society, you need to command the attention of large swaths of people. And so that has created a kind of, arms race for the best possible technologies and tools to command as much attention as possible. And these social media platforms have created a business model where they offer a free service that harvests tons of our attention, and they're able to insert ads and profit from it. And if you think about that clearly in economic and activist terms, it's like this. You own a property, you own a piece of land, and you have some trees growing on that land, natural resources that are growing on your land that are a part of your land. That's your mind. That land is your mind. Large organizations and entities are coming onto that land, cutting the trees down, taking the lumber and selling it to the highest bidder and making a profit, and you don't see any of that profit. So when you practice mindfulness, you're sort of chaining yourself to your trees and saying, you know what? I want to have control. I want to have a say in what I pay attention to. I want to be able to pay attention to what I deem relevant. And I know you have all kinds of tricks and great technology to cut these trees down, but I'm not going to let you. I am going to reclaim the trees on my land. That's what attention activism is all about. So going back to these 3 waves, again, there's this amazing amount of historical tradition of all kinds of spiritual, religious, contemplative practices that have emerged in our history. It's fundamentally a human tradition. The second wave is science embracing and exploring that tradition and realizing the clinical relevance of it. And my contention to you is that we're entering a world where the third wave is that mindfulness is now a subversive act to reclaim our freedom of mind, that we have a kind of inalienable right to a freedom of attention in response to the exponential media technologies that overwhelm us with information and try to influence our behavior on I was going to say a daily basis, but I would say on an hourly basis, on a minutely basis, like every minute, something is trying to ding at you and grab your attention and influence you. So when you see someone meditating, right, they're doing 3 things, right? Maybe they're doing something spiritual or religious about understanding themselves and where they fit into a larger, more cosmic picture of some kind. They're also doing something in that same moment that's good for their physical and mental health, that's good for their well-being. And my contention to you is they're also doing nothing. And that, surprisingly, is an activist stance in the modern world that has us doing all the time, demands us to be productive, demands us to be a certain way, that if you just sit there, do nothing, pay attention to your body, listen to the sounds, notice the colors in your eyes, and slow down, that you are actually doing something that's quite subversive to where our society is going. And you're reclaiming something that enables you to be more authentically who you want to be. And I think that's a very important thing in our society. There's an old Zen metaphor of a rushing river being the mind, that the mind is a river of thoughts and feelings and sensations. And mindfulness is not about standing in the river and trying to stop the water, but it's more about just sort of climbing up on the riverbank so that the river doesn't just take us away. Well, I think, that's a couple thousand-year-old metaphor. And in the modern world, it's more like a whitewater rapid, right? There's so much information coming down that river that it's very difficult to get out of that river. And that's why I believe that in the exponential age, a healthy relationship with technology is a prerequisite for mindfulness. So here's some practical tips for how to use technology healthfully, because I believe if you've tried to practice mindfulness and you found it a struggle, one of the reasons might be the technology is getting all up in the way, and we want to make sure we have freedom for that. So we might want to prioritize rest and sleep by having no internet in the room, getting an old school alarm clock so we don't go to sleep with our phone and wake up with our phone. I've experimented with putting time limits on personal screen time. So once 9 p.m. comes around, we shut it down and we have some space in the evening to connect with loved ones, maybe do a little bit of stretching and slowly, read a little bit and slowly get to sleep. There's tools that can help you remove blue light from your screens at night. Those are really helpful. We can also do this in the context of relationships. We can have no technology at the dinner table. We can tether the phone to our charger. So something I like to do is keep my phone in my office in the charger so I don't end up just sitting there on the couch looking at it, right? We can also use technology proactively and schedule, especially in this pandemic, daily or weekly intentional phone calls where we really use technology in a better way, not just a few text messages, but a face-to-face interaction where we're really connecting with people in a deep way. A message in a chat group is not the same satisfying level of connection as a face-to-face video call, which is also not the same as a face-to-face, in-person connection. And then there's awareness and focus, where we can remove specific apps from our phone that we know tend to distract us. We can use break timers when we're working. We can disable all the notifications on our devices except for phone calls. That's something that I do. I have no email on my phone, no social media on my phone. We can also install services to monitor and limit use. And the framing I want to give you is that this is actually an activist stance right now. You're resisting and creating space for your own mind in a society that is very crowded in the mental world. Stay Focused is a really great tool to limit websites. So you can give yourself 50 minutes of social media a day. There's also great tools on both iPhone and Android to track your phone use. So you can see that, I use my phone 2 hours a day. It can be very shocking just to realize how often you're looking at it. Ultimately, the healthy relationship with technology is a foundation for a strong mindfulness practice. And then the mindfulness practice is something that allows us to proactively work to reclaim our attention. And beyond that, where I found myself, having realized these things maybe 10, 15 years ago, is, I started my career as a technology designer just working for whoever would pay. But I've gotten so passionate about this force in our society that I am starting to design technologies for attention activism. And I have colleagues in healthcare, in social work, in business, in law, in government. You don't have to throw your whole life away to start bringing these ideas into where you are. If you're a teacher, you can bring it into the classroom a little bit. You can advocate for this stuff in your society, in your school, right? If you're a healthcare practitioner, you bring it into your practice and so on. So ultimately, this attention activism, this mindfulness revolution that we're seeing in all sectors of society, in my framing, is actually an activist stance. Ultimately, the way you spend your waking hours, the way you pay attention, is the fundamental currency of your life. And so letting that be sort of domineered by all these forces is not the best way for our own well-being and our own happiness. So I highly encourage you to think very carefully about how you might create more space in your mind to be the authentic person who you're hoping to be in this life. The stakes really are that high. So thank you so much, and I want to leave some time for questions now.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Jay. And a real shout out to all the participants out there. This is probably the most engaged audience I've seen, and that's in part due to the questions you've been asking, and people have been really forthcoming with their thoughts on this. Questions, and I'm glad it's only a few questions because we don't have a lot of time. But I'll start with Alyssa's question, Jay. She said, what is the role for communities and governments in resisting the attention economy? Is there a role just beyond the individual?
Absolutely. So if you take a look at examples like smoking and drunk driving. They're really instructive about how our society changes in ways like this. First of all, they're inspiring to see that it's possible. But you see the role of government and regulation for sure. You also see the role of science, right? So we want the science to show the effects of this stuff. We want government to really, mandate and regulate these corporations and to regulate the platforms and to understand. But also, both of those forces, like science and government, really get influenced strongly by the cultural interest, right? Smoking, it took a lot of science about the effects of smoking, but it also took the government regulation about the labels to put on the package and how these things can be advertised and that they can't be advertised to children. But on top of that, we also needed a lot of individuals to speak up about how this is not cool anymore and to share it and for it to become a cultural revolution. So I think we want to see that same trifecta where individuals like us are voting with our attention by not paying attention to these services as much as we can and finding more space in our lives while the government is thinking about regulation. There's some wonderful organizations, reach out to me and I can connect you with them that are working on the regulation side. One that comes to mind is the Center for Humane Technology. And then you want the scientists, and we have more and more scientists who are interested in studying the effects of this stuff.
That's great. There's a couple of questions more along the very practical tip line, and particularly spurred by your one slide that had just those fantastic quick tips that we can all put into practice right away. But Sangeeta said, I can't get my to-do list out of my mind when I try to meditate. And she's looking for a tip to try to get rid of this.
Yeah, that's a very, very common. In general, one of the things that makes that even harder is the idea that we need to get our to-do list out of our mind, that we resist it, that we think we're doing something wrong. Fundamentally, one of the biggest misconceptions about mindfulness is that it's about completely clearing your mind until you have no thoughts at all. But asking yourself not to think is like asking a cow not to moo. Like, it's who you are, right? I think, therefore I am. So it's really more about a healthy relationship to notice the to-do list come out and to sort of step out of the stream and let it go by, right? You're not trying to stop the river. You're trying to sit up on the bank and say, oh, there's my to-do list again. There it is. That's what my brain does, And that kind of healthy relationship tends to be more what mindfulness is about, to notice these patterns and to not resist them, to not fight them, but to let them happen and bring that awareness to the to-do list and the fact that it's coming up. And maybe even some insights will come like, hey, when I try to meditate at 5 p.m. at the end of the workday, it's a to-do list that comes at my head. When I do it in the morning, something else comes in my mind. So I would strongly recommend not trying to fight that, but really try to embrace it as a part of your process. Let them come and go, as Karina just put in the chat. Yeah.
That actually touches on a question Joyce had very early in the webinar, but I'll reiterate that question just because there's overlap, but it's different. And she's wondering, don't we want some level of daydreaming? Does it not fuel creativity?
Yeah, a wonderful question, right? So the idea here is not to remove daydreaming altogether. Again, not possible. It's who you are, right? Thinking is who you are. Creativity is a part of who you are. What you're sort of exploring with these mindfulness practices is a more healthy relationship with that flooding river, right? I work as a designer, so creativity is something very, very important to me. And I can tell you from experience, if I'm going into a creative session and my to-do list is swimming through my mind and all the things I need to worry about and that shopping list and all this sort of stuff, I barely have the space to even let the sprouts of creativity grow. But if I can actually get some sense of reducing my default mode and finding a sense of balance, I can clear my garden and really notice those subtle seeds sprouting and really nurture them in the way they need to become really great ideas. So I don't think we're at odds. The idea here is not to remove any kind of mind-wandering and creative thought, but really to harness its potential fully and not let all the saboteurs, both internal and external, get in the way.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more. I've got one from Ron, who says, mindfulness slows things down, but does it actually help us make better decisions?
Interesting. Can you say that one again?
So mindfulness slows things down, but does it actually help us make better decisions?
I think it's related to my previous answer. I don't know, like, I'm not really up to date on the literature around this. I know there has been some research on mindful decision making, specifically in the like mindful leadership. So there are people studying like what happens when our society's leaders, like executives and political leaders, practice mindfulness and what that does for decision making, especially under pressure. And I think some of those findings are quite strong. And if I remember correctly, one of the mechanisms purported is that, in fact, the stress response cultivates a kind of reactionary nature, right? Like something happens and we just want to react to something and just completely we need to do this. We need to fix this. We need to fix this. And we've all worked with someone and been that person before where it's like a fire's burning and we're just telling everyone, we got to fix it. We got to put out the fire. Whereas when you've got this sort of sense of like, I'm going to take a step back and not let this throw me off balance and make a more kind of balanced decision, that can be really, really beneficial. I think the other thing about slowing down, it's like, again, going back to that crowded mind idea that like decision making really benefits from clarity, which is this ability to fully experience what's going on and to have the time to say, listen, I know we would benefit if I made a snap decision on this, but I think it's going to be worth it for me to take an hour to review the evidence. I know we're going to lose a little bit of the value of an immediate decision, but I think it's going to be worth it. And those can be really hard decisions to make when the pressure is really high.
Well, this has been really great. Thank you,
Sean.
Yes.
Can I just want to answer Kathy's question because I think it's really important.
I was going to try to squeeze one when I saw that question. Go ahead.
To all of my friends who have jobs in advertising and marketing, I just want to tell you from experience, I had a job in technology design, right? I just spent a webinar talking about how challenging technology and designers are responsible for a lot of it. I know that feeling. The idea is not that you have to stop your job or whatever, right? But the idea is to kind of in the long tail, if you care about these issues, to number one, think about the tactics you're using and think about where the line is around what is considered to you to be a fair amount of influence and what is considered to be too much. And these are blurry areas. But the other thing is in the long tail of your career, to think about how you might use your tools for the best cause possible, right? You can influence people to do lots of things. And so really trying to navigate to something where you're influencing people to do something you value, that you're value aligned with who you're working for. Not always easy to do, I understand completely, but that would be my best thoughts for you.
As a marketer, thank you, Jay.
Yeah.
That's some great advice. And the last thing I want is for technology to actually cut us off mid-section. So I'll stop the questions there and just take a few seconds to thank everyone again for their input and to remind people that within the next few days, we'll send a follow-up email that'll have the recording of the session. I'll touch base with Jay to see if we can add in a few links to some of the resources that were referenced and provide you all with some other resources to keep you on this path of exploring mindfulness and how it relates to technology. But huge thank you, Jay. This has been great. And thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you, everyone. And yeah, take a sense of that awareness into whatever you have going next. Bring a sense of presence, take a deep breath, and I wish you the best.